An episode nobody wants to have to record as we discuss the life and death of Dwayne Haskins, and we try to get things back onto a normal path to wrap up today's episode with Mock Draft Monday. All of that right now on the Locked On Commanders podcast.
Your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome in, Commanders fans, to the Locked On Commanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, free and available on all platforms, and we thank you for making us your first listener, your first view every single day. I'm David Harrison, covering the Commanders for Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation. My co-host Chris Russell, one half of the Russell and Medhurst show on the Team 980. Find Chris and Pete there Monday through Friday, 3 to 7 p.m. Eastern or anytime, along with the show on the Audacy app. You can also find us on Twitter at DHarrison82, at RussellMania621, and at LO Commanders. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Chris, shocking news on Saturday that really rocked the entire sports world, the football world, but especially the communities surrounding the Ohio State Buckeyes, the Washington Commanders, and the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the friends and family and teammates of Dwayne Haskins, 24-year-old former 2019 first-round draft pick. Again, most recently with the Pittsburgh Steelers, was told by the Steelers that he would have the opportunity to compete with Mitchell Trubisky for the starting job, was looking forward to that opportunity. He's married, obviously had an extensive family, unfortunately was struck and killed, come to find out, by a dump truck in South Florida early Saturday morning trying to cross a busy roadway. I'm not familiar with the area, but a busy highway is essentially how it was described.
Yeah, and David, I am semi-familiar with that area, but I'd be lying if I told you very familiar or, that I've been there recently. But here's what I know. That is a very, very, very busy highway. And at 6:30-ish in the morning, people are driving, at speeds that you probably normally wouldn't be driving. We don't know if that's exactly what happened here, and we don't want to speculate. But there's chances, and maybe a good chance that some of that may have contributed to this. We will see where the investigation goes. Clearly, we are not police. Clearly, we are not lawyers and criminal investigators or anything like that. So we don't know exactly what happened here. Police have said they don't know the reason why Dwayne Haskins was out of his vehicle and attempting to cross over the westbound lanes of I-595 in the Fort Lauderdale area. So again, until we get that kind of information, I don't know how much more of the actual facts in the scene and what led to this horrific incident. And I'll just say this, because we don't know that, we'll kind of lead that to the professionals and the investigators. Mm-hmm. But I'll just say this, no matter what happened, you never, ever, 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 and I know it happens in our society in many different ways, you never expect a 24-year-old in the prime of his life to have it end so quickly. And, I got to cover Dwayne, not as well as I would like to, not on an everyday basis, but of course, in many meetings and press conferences and games, David, from the time that he was a then Washington Redskins first-round draft pick. And, I think everybody knew Dwayne as a young man who had kind of a love and a passion for life. Yeah. And maybe he struggled a little bit to harness it and figure it all out. And clearly, there's a football element to this. But Dwayne was, as far as I know, well-liked in the Washington, then Redskins, now Commanders locker room. Mm-hmm. Clearly, some of his former teammates have spoken up and so eloquently. Terry McLaurin, as Terry McLaurin as you're going to get, with just some unbelievable, brilliant tribute and words for his friend and now his former teammate. And I would just say this, I know there's a lot of controversy going on around about this story. let's love each other a little bit more, and let's have more understanding for each other instead of having our pitchfork out. And that means for all sides, right? That means, for media that have been roundly criticized for this particular situation and what came out. And that means for Dwayne and what happened here in Washington and why it didn't work out and why it was working so well in Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. I think it's really important to remember that we as human beings are flawed and sometimes very flawed, and it takes us a while to figure it out. And hopefully, by every account, David, it sounds like Dwayne was figuring it out.
Yeah, I mean, in every facet of the words, a young man with a tremendous amount of potential, and that's exactly what Dan and Tanya Snyder called him in their statement that they released following the tragic accident, writing, quotes, "We are devastated to hear the news of the tragic passing of Dwayne Haskins Jr. He was a young man with a tremendous amount of potential who had an infectious personality. To say we are heartbroken is an understatement. Our hearts and prayers are with the members of Dwayne's family and all those who knew and loved him," end quote. And of course, Chris, one of the stories attached to this whole Dwayne Haskins experience that people have gone through is, the passion and love that Dan Snyder had for making sure that Dwayne Haskins was a member of his football team. And again, we can celebrate the life and more in the potential that is lost in a tragic incident like this without digging too deeply into the weeds. This isn't one of those times to really go into doing all that, but it just kind of shows the humanity of things and where people can come from. Ron Rivera also releasing a statement amongst, many others, Mike Tomlin, Terry McLaurin, like you talked about, Joe Burrow, who a lot of people, from the outside of this game looking in would think that Joe Burrow and Dwayne Haskins were once competitors. Joe Burrow left Ohio State because he lost a starting job to Dwayne Haskins, but in reality, they're brothers in combat. When we talk about combat, we talk about a lot of war terms in football, and that's basically what that competition at Ohio State didn't divide them. It didn't make them, turn them against each other. It canonized them. It brought them together and made them brothers. And I wrote up a piece about Joe Burrow's, statement tribute. Is a very simple, very short tribute to Dwayne Haskins with a slow-mo video of them meeting midfield during a game and hugging. And going through the kind of the history of them. And when Joe Burrow tore his ACL on the field there at FedEx Stadium, or FedEx Field, it was Chase Young, Terry McLaurin, and Dwayne Haskins by his side, Buckeye brothers and teammates, to wish him well and to console him that, the competitive nature of this business and this game exists, mostly within the logo and within the field. After that, it's a brotherhood, it's a unity, it's a union, right? The NFLPA, it's very much a band of brothers in that type of sense. And so it's good to see the humanity of this coming out. Chase Claypool, probably one of the biggest parts of that as well.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, Chase Claypool apparently was with Dwayne, up until maybe right before or the night before. We know that Dwayne was part of a group of Pittsburgh Steelers that were working out in South Florida. He said, on his Twitter, quote, "I spent your final moments with you, and I can't help but think about how selfless you were in those moments. All you cared about was making sure that everyone around you was okay. And I can't thank you enough for that. You are what I strive to be." David, we don't know what exactly Chase Claypool means by that. Was he, with Dwayne right before the accident at another location? We just don't know. So we're going to have to wait for the facts to come out. But when you hear that kind of, those kind of words, when you hear or when you read Terry McLaurin saying, save an end zone in heaven, so that we can celebrate together, it tells you, the kind of impact that, that Dwayne made. And I got a text from Danny Smith, who's the current Pittsburgh Steelers special teams coordinator. And he's been in Pittsburgh for, the last 9 years. And of course, I covered him and became good friends with Danny, when he was here under a couple of different head coaches. And, I, of course, sent my condolences. And he said, it just in part, quote, "He was a good dude in our building," end quote. He said some other things that, but that's what you need to know. You hear Chase Claypool, you see what Ben Roethlisberger said, T.J. Watt, of course, Mike Tomlin, so many other Pittsburgh Steelers, Mitchell Trubisky, who just got there, guys that he was competing with. It seemed like Dwayne really, really, really took this opportunity under Mike Tomlin to heart and did a lot of things really well to impress a lot of people there. And if that, unfortunately, if that's his lasting legacy, then that's the best news, I guess, we can get out of a horrific situation.
Absolutely. And coming up next, Chris, we're going to share some thoughts and memories of Dwayne Haskins Jr.'s life and time in football, especially with the Washington NFL franchise. And we're going to do so thanks to our friends at betonline.net, who are your number one source for all your sports betting needs and information. Find all your latest sports developments, odds, podcasts, and reviews for all the different leagues this season at BetOnline, your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action at BetOnline, where the game starts.
All right, thanks again, Washington Commanders fans, for making us your first listen and watch of the day. If you're watching along on YouTube, make sure you're following Locked On NFL, where Locked On experts covering the biggest stories around the NFL every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, we welcome you back with a somber tone and the memories of Dwayne Haskins, who unfortunately was tragically killed at the age of 24 at the scene of an accident in South Florida on Saturday morning, just after 6:30 a.m. Eastern time, again at the age of 24. And David and I, of course, send our condolences on behalf of the entire Locked On Podcast Network to Dwayne's wife, his mom and dad, his sister, people that, I got to know very, very, very briefly, David. I know Dwayne was a good family man. He cared very much about his family, and he had a really good bond with his sister. And it kind of struck me on Sunday morning when I found out that it was National Sibling Day. Mm-hmm. What she must be going through, never mind his wife, his mom, I know in losing my brother a couple of years ago, it's really hard to process that, because it's really hard for everybody, to process, but especially when you're reminded so quickly of that. What we wanted to do was take the time to remember some of the really good from Dwayne in his time here in Washington. And again, we have to admit that it was short, right? It did not go as they were hoping for it to go, and as Dwayne was hoping for it to go. That is fact. We don't need to go into some of the things that allegedly happened, did happen, why it didn't work, what have you. I thought we would take the time, you and I, to kind of go over a favorite memory or two. Did you have one that you wanted to share with the audience? And of course, the audience can share, in a variety of different ways at LO Commanders on our voicemail. We'll give you all that information coming up later on in the show. But David, did you have one?
Yeah, I mean, we love to hear from Washington fans or just football fans in general who have, good memories of Dwayne Haskins. And Chris, you're 100% correct. Nobody's perfect. Everybody is flawed. We all have things in our past or in our lives that happen that other people wouldn't necessarily, approve of and agree with. And I think, Chris, you and I both come from a little bit of an older generation. I think, you're a little bit older than I am, but we both come from a little bit of an older generation that are very happy that, cameras were not as prevalent when we were 24 or 20 or 21, and social media also didn't exist. So none of us are without flaw. And I think it's just important to remember in times like this, there's a sports arena where we talk about each other's flaws. We talk about each other's shortcomings, because it's one part of some of our jobs. And so it's just kind of part of the nature of being in the spotlight. But moments like this is where you take the time to kind of just appreciate the good parts of what a person presented. And Dwayne Haskins, for any shortcomings he may or may not have had, not an evil person. Like, at the end of the day, we're not talking about an evil person here. We're talking about a person who was pursuing a dream. And that's honestly, most of my memories of Dwayne Haskins come from Ohio State. I'm an Ohio State Buckeye fan, born and raised by my father, who grew up right outside of Columbus, Ohio, and dreamed of playing for Woody Hayes and wearing the scarlet and gray. And quite honestly, was never good enough to wear the scarlet and gray. So he grew up a fan and raised me to be a fan. And I didn't cover the Washington football franchise until the year that Dwayne was no longer with the team. So that's just kind of part of my path. And I remember Dwayne, coming in as a backup quarterback and saving the day against Michigan when JT Barrett went down with the knee injury when they were trailing against the Michigan Wolverines. I remember the battle between he and Joe Burrow. And I didn't honestly even really know either quarterback. I just knew that from what everybody was saying about the two young men, that whoever won that battle, the Buckeyes were going to get themselves one heck of a quarterback. And then Joe Burrow gets injured in the midst of that competition, which kind of derailed it a little bit. But and then Dwayne coming out, guns a-blazing, in his first start as a Buckeye quarterback, winning rivalry games against Penn State and the Lions, against the Michigan Wolverines, kind of taking part of that, and honestly changing kind of the path of Ohio State quarterbacks. And I know a lot of people talked about and will talk about Dwayne maybe a little bit overdrafted, as many quarterbacks are when he came out of Ohio State, but really one of the first, not the first, but of one of very first in a very long time of Ohio State quarterbacks to be selected in the first round. So to go to such a historic school and be able to achieve everything he achieved there while he was in Columbus, and then become a first round draft pick of Washington that season is very influential. And you see it. Justin Fields ends up being a first round draft pick following in the footsteps of Dwayne Haskins, and CJ Stroud is expected to be the next Ohio State quarterback to be selected in the first round. It all started, this generation anyway, started with Dwayne Haskins. So for whatever shortcomings he may have had as a professional, as a human being, whatever it is, there are a lot of things this young man achieved in his life in short, 24 years that need to be celebrated. And those are just a handful of them. And then the video, Chris, I'm sure you've seen of him as an 11-year-old visiting Ohio State and saying, I'm going to go to college here. And the fact that he did it, we've all chased dreams. All of us have been dreamers. So, there's a lot to celebrate in the short life of Dwayne Haskins.
You're so right. And I forgot about that connection with you and Ohio State. So I'm glad you went there because, I didn't get to cover him every single day. But I was around him enough to kind of get a feel for the person. And I think maybe in some ways he was a little bit misunderstood, right? I think he was, maybe you would describe him, kind of as a big lovable teddy bear that just, needed to kind of get a little more seasoning on him, right? I truly believe Dwayne was a good person and meant well. From a football perspective, David, I won't forget this day, his first win. He had already been brought in relief in week 4 of 2019, his rookie year, when Case Keenum got hurt against the New York Giants. Jay Gruden did not think he was ready, and nobody really around the building thought he was ready. So he was only going to play based on an emergency basis, and Colt McCoy was still banged up at the time. Case Keenum was injured going into that game, got re-injured, so Dwayne had to come in. It didn't go well. But fast forwarding to late November of 2019 against Detroit Lions, against the Detroit Lions at FedEx Field, Dwayne didn't play great that day, but he made enough plays in the fourth quarter, David, to leave a couple of fourth quarter field goal drives and to get Washington their second win of the year, right? Again, Jay Gruden's been fired already by this point. So, the season's clearly not going well. But I'll never forget the absolute crazy hugs that he had with now Minnesota Vikings head coach Kevin O'Connell, who was then the offensive coordinator on the sideline. The two of them could not have embraced harder or more,
emphatically, that's the word I like to use.
Yeah, exactly. And then right after that, Morgan Moses, who's now with the New York Jets, again, just embracing Dwayne like it meant the world to Dwayne Haskins, to the organization, to the fans that were there. Unfortunately, there was an incident that happened, right after that, where he was kind of taking some pictures with fans, and you get
lost in the moment. Who hasn't gotten lost in a moment before?
Exactly. And so I choose to remember, the good part of that day. And then just kind of finishing up the next week. Again, he didn't play great in this game, but Washington came from 14-0 down, riding in a lot of ways the coattails of Adrian Peterson and Darius Geis, the running backs. But Dwayne was a part of it. And who did they beat? They beat Ron Rivera and the Carolina Panthers. And why was that significant? Not only did they come from behind, but that was Ron's last game as head coach with the Carolina Panthers. And of course, soon after that, he would become the new Washington Redskins football team / Commanders, head coach. So that 2-week period, where things started to kind of crystallize, and Dwayne actually played pretty well after that, despite some losses. And you thought they really had something, maybe, or maybe it was finally clicking in. Of course, it didn't work out, but that stretch was fun to see, kind of young men have fun again.
And I remember the selfie or the picture incident, as just a general football observer. And I remember what happened at the time too. And, I know a lot of people were kind of harping on him for it. Look, it's one of those moments where you're just young again, and you're just caught up in the emotion of the game and the love of the game that, I didn't hold that against him back then. I'm certainly not going to hold it against him now.
Agreed. Rest in peace, Dwayne Haskins, unfortunately and sadly killed at the age of 24. DH, we didn't have you for very long, but we'll miss you, and our thoughts and our prayers, are with your family and your friends, and hope that heaven needs a really good young quarterback and a loving dude. So rest in peace, and obviously we'll miss you. Coming up next here on the Locked On Commanders podcast, it is Mock Draft Monday and mock draft season time. We'll have a full fourth rounder with trades coming up next. Who did the Commanders select, and who did they bypass? Guys, it's Chris Russell, David Harrison for our friends at Built Bar. Of course, eating right is so hard to do, but one way to consistently make it easier is with our friends at Built Bar. Have you tried the Built Bar Puffs? If you haven't, you're missing out on a great experience. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy, they're not a protein bar, they're a treat, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate, just like every Built Bar is. Banana cream pie, coconut marshmallow, cinnamony churro. Whatever you want, Built Bar is going to get it for you, whether it's in a Built Bar flavor or the Built Bar Puffs. And speaking of the Built Bars, usually right around 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, 17 or so grams of protein. You compare that to your normal standard candy bar, and it is so much better for you. Check out built.com. They have all of the different flavors, occasional limited time flavors, different packages that you can put together. They're great. You will love yourself some Built Bars. At built.com, use the promo code LOCKED15, 15% off your entire order using the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com.
David Harrison and Chris Russell back here for the final segment of this episode of the Locked On Commanders podcast. And, always a difficult episode to do when you have to deal with the death of a player, former coach, personnel, what have you. Unfortunately, this is something that, Chris, we're I don't want to say accustomed to, but we've done before. And unfortunately, we'll have to do it again at some point in time. Death is unfortunately a part of life. But there are a bunch of people right now, Chris, who are building up to one of the best moments of their life. And it's a moment that Dwayne Haskins enjoyed with his friends and family being selected in the 2019 NFL draft in the first round of that NFL draft. And there are other players and young men who have been working to achieve the same goal, and they are oh so close to doing so. It's mock draft season. It's mock draft season to the fullest extent as we get closer and closer to the NFL draft. And our guy, Chad Reuter over at NFL.com, dropping a 4-round mock draft with some surprises. And we'll get to Washington here in just a minute, Chris. But first and foremost, 3 quarterbacks going in the top 5 of this mock draft, which is surprising in itself. Really, 3 quarterbacks in the top 5 of any NFL draft class is going to be a little bit surprising. And typically you end up with at least 1 or 2 teams that have a little bit of buyer's remorse a couple years down the road. We've seen that before. We see some teams going through it now with perhaps Tua Tagovailoa with the Miami Dolphins. We'll see what happens this year. Kind of a critical year for him to show them that they made the right choice back when they selected him. And in this mock draft, Detroit right off the bat takes Malik Willis. They don't have to move. They've already got the number 2 pick, so they take the upside. Jared Goff, you assume, is going to lead the charge in 2022, and then Malik will either take the reins at 23 or maybe even 24, depending on how things develop. And then at number 4, the Seattle Seahawks trade up. They take that Russell Wilson, number 9 overall pick they got from the Denver Broncos. They package it, they move up, and they take Matt Corral out of Ole Miss, which I think is a big surprise as the second quarterback off the board, not just the trade up to number 4, but also being the second quarterback off the board. And then the New Orleans Saints, who remember already packaged a lot of their future to move into the first round a second time, get the 2 first-round picks. They then repackage, move up to number 5, and they take the quote-unquote most pro-ready quarterback in this year's class, Kenny Pickett, at number 5 to, I guess, be their next Drew Brees. I don't know. If you're Jameis Winston, I guess you're looking down the road to 2023 to see who might need a quarterback then, because you're probably not staying in New Orleans very much longer. Chris, before we get to Washington, what are your thoughts on those first 5 picks, 3 quarterbacks, and the 2 trade-ups that resulted in those 3 quarterbacks?
Yeah, I mean, I could see, of course, the trade market exploding. But, I still wonder whether Detroit really is in on Malik Willis at number 2, and or whether they're trying to drum up one of these teams that you just talked about traded up, like Seattle moving from 9 to 4, or New Orleans moving up after acquiring a second first-round pick to move up with the Giants to pick number 5. If Detroit is trying to get them to move up to number 2,
right,
David, which is what I would be trying to do. So, I mean, I could see them, of course, staying at number 2 and taking the young kid and developing him, like you said, behind Jared Goff, who's still under contract for a couple more years. What is surprising to me is Matt Corral at number 4. Listen, Matt Corral is tough as you know what. He's got mobility. I know he seemed to be a little erratic to me on the deep ball. But I know he's competitive. I know he cares. I don't know if he is a number 5 overall pick.
Right.
And my guess, my hunch is that he's not, and you'll agree with that. I could be wrong, but and I'm not trying to hurt Matt Corral's stock. I don't know if I see top shelf quarterback in him.
Right. I think by and large, that is the opinion that, none of these guys are really genuinely a top 5 talent, top 10 talent in the NFL draft. Malik Willis, again, the highest upside, Kenny Pickett, the lowest floor in the group, and everybody else is kind of in between. I've really kind of grown to really appreciate Desmond Ritter's game, but even that I still look at as kind of a late day 1, if you really want that 5th year option on him, or an early day 2 type of prospect. So a lot of surprises there. But that actually helps the Washington Commanders, Chris, because the assumption is that because of the Carson Wentz deal, that Washington is no longer looking at quarterback in round 1, maybe round 2 if the right guy falls. But the assumption is that number 11 will not be spent on a quarterback. So the more quarterbacks that go ahead of number 11, the more talent gets pushed down the board. And in this situation, the top 2 names that we've seen mocked to the Washington Commanders most often, wide receiver Garrett Wilson out of Ohio State and safety Kyle Hamilton out of Notre Dame, both available at number 11. Now, we've talked about this on this show. I set forth my Washington Commanders draft rules last week. We talked about them at the end of last week, that if Kyle Hamilton is available at number 11, just because of the dip in position talent versus wide receiver, he has to be the pick. But here, Chad Reuter takes Garrett Wilson, the wide receiver at Ohio State, and lets Kyle Hamilton slip past Washington number 11. What are your thoughts on that pick?
All the way actually to number 18 and the Philadelphia Eagles. Which would be a kind of a double whammy. I don't love really any one of these wide receivers, at the number 11 spot because of what you just mentioned. There's so much talent at that particular position, not only in the first round, but also in the second round. Of course, as we've made clear, looking to trade down, that's what I think they should do. But I agree with you that if Kyle Hamilton and, I'll just keep adding this, if Sauce Gardner is there from Cincinnati, that's where I would be going. Now, in this particular mock, Sauce went slightly ahead, I think, I think at number 10, actually. Yeah. Derek Stingley was there, but interesting to see how the board kind of played out. Just for the interest of time, at number 47, of course, bypassing Kyle Hamilton in the first round, Chad has the Washington Commanders staying at number 47, of course, a couple of spots down because of the trade with Indianapolis, and taking Louis Cine, the safety from Georgia. And then in the fourth round, he actually does have them make a trade, David, and taking interior offensive lineman from LSU, Chasen Hines. And that's a projected trade with the Giants, but we don't have any details on what they would actually give up for that.
Right. And I think, the subsequent pick kind of reinforces what we were talking about. Louis Cine, very good at what he does, but he's very one-dimensional. He just kind of is what he is as a safety. Kyle Hamilton's very versatile. You can play him a lot of different roles as a defensive back inside of your defense, whereas Lewis Cine, and really a lot of these guys, Jaquan Brisker, I'm a fan of. Petrie at a Baylor, I'm a fan of. But none of those guys are as physical, as versatile, rather, as Kyle Hamilton could be. But then you look at, if you take Hamilton at 11, then you come back at 47, there are a lot of options. You might have John Mechie available. You're probably going to have Sky Moore available. Jahan Dotson could possibly slip that far. There are a lot of potential opportunities to add wide receiver in the second round versus the safeties that you're going to get in the second round. So that's why you look at those pairings. Would you rather have a Garrett Wilson or a Lewis Cine, who Lewis Cine, again, is going to play much more closer in line of scrimmage, more of a box guy, kind of think a little bit of a Landon Collins type of player? Or would you rather have Kyle Hamilton, who can do a little bit of everything and still have a wide receiver that can bring you a dynamic ability to help Terry McLaurin and also free up Curtis Samuel if he is healthy enough to play out of the slot? To me, it's an easy answer, and this mock kind of shows you why we do keep saying that Kyle Hamilton. I agree with Sauce. I just don't imagine Sauce is going to get there. But if Kyle Hamilton is there and Sauce is not, he's got to be the pick.
Absolutely. More mock drafts still to come. We'll have a lot of them for you, and the reaction ensuing. Again, we will remember the life and times of Dwayne Haskins Jr., unfortunately leaving us at the age of 24. Our thoughts and prayers with his family. Thanks again for making the Locked On Commanders podcast your first listen and your first watch of the day. Now make your second listen and watch the Locked On NFL Draft podcast with Ryan Tracy and former NFL corner Eric Crocker, as they bring the NFL Draft to life every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast. We'll be back with another episode as we get the week really rolling here and the clock winds down to the NFL Draft at the end of the month. If you want to hop in, it's lockedonwashingtoncommanders@gmail.com or the voicemail line 301-615-3577. That's 301-615-3577. For David Harrison, who's covering the Washington Commanders for SI.com's Fan Nation, I'm Chris Russell, one half of the Russell and Medhurst Show on the Team 980 and the Audacy app. If you're out and about, please be safe, be kind to one another. Don't drive too fast, especially considering, of course, what happened over the weekend. Remember Dwayne Haskins in your thoughts and prayers. And thank you for joining us right here on the Locked On Commanders podcast.